someone was talking about the difference between, well, flying to a destination, of course, you're just getting this cool bird's eye view, and on a train, you're seeing the world go by, and that's a lovely experience. But biking or hiking, it's like you're inside the movie, whereas in the train, you're seeing the movie.
Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, where every other Thursday on the Active Travel Adventures Podcast, I bring you an exciting new adventure. I believe that if you want a kick-ass life, adding adventure travel to your life is a must. You not only get to see some of the world's most remarkable landscapes and meet some of the coolest people, adventure travel makes you feel empowered and helps you to tackle some of the biggest challenges in your everyday life. So come along for another great adventure on today's Active Travel Adventures Podcast. Today I'm going to be interviewing Kristen Henning from Travel Past 50. We first met Kristen on our Galapagos episode number 18. Today Kristen's going to be telling us about her amazing bicycle tour through the Stiletto Heel of Italy. She's going to tell us about visiting some UNESCO World Heritage Sites, the incredible food, great wine variety that she discovered, and all the amazing landscape. In addition to learning about the adventure itself of biking up and down the Stiletto Heel of Italy, we're also going to discuss bike touring in general. What do you need to look out for? What kind of decisions need to be made? Is this a right fit for you? So we're going to go a little bit of detail into that as well. And I think we've got a great episode for you today. And I hope you'll come along for the ride. Thanks for listening. Our guest today is Kristen Henning. We first met her when she told us about her Galapagos adventure back in episode 18. But Kristen, for those that may not have heard that episode, can you give us a little introduction about yourself and perhaps tell us your age?
Yes, certainly. I'll start with the age because our blog is called Travel Past 50. So we're concerned with active travel and cultural travel for travelers over 50. And I fit that. I am 65. My husband is a year older, a couple years older than I am. And we have been traveling pretty much nonstop, almost nomadically since 2010. In the last couple of years, we've based in Minneapolis, our hometown. But over the course of these years, we've just been getting more and more interested in active travel as a way to be closer to the destinations we're visiting and to stay healthy and happy.
Perfect. And you actually pretty much just sold everything you own and hit the road. Is that right?
We did. We had a big old house and we sold it and we sold our cars and we sold most of our stuff. We did have a storage unit that's now whittled down to nothing. And partly because our children pilfered through it and took a lot of good stuff. So that's nice. It's getting used, what we did keep. And yeah, that's kind of, we traded a mortgage for traveling is what we did.
Perfect. I kind of downsized myself, and that does afford me the ability to do a lot more traveling as well. So for folks, it's a cool idea. So today we are going to be talking about a recent bike tour that you took to Italy. How about giving us a brief overview of that?
Yeah, this was our second bike tour. We did have another occasion to bike in France a couple years ago, and we were interested in doing something again. And we met a guy named Jim Johnson, who is with a company called BikeTours.com, very small operation in the United States, and their specialty is European bike tours. And they're essentially an agent working directly with local bike companies. So we loved the sound of working with him, and we found really, I think, the main things that most bikers considering a bike tour need to think about is exactly what the process we went through. Where do you want to go? Do you want to bike on a self-guided tour or with a group? And what are your other interests that you want to incorporate into your route?
Well, let's break that down a little bit. For those that don't understand the difference between a self-guided and a guided tour, could you explain that for us?
Yes. The guided tours, you'll be with a group. It might be if you've got a extended family trip, you could do a group tour, and it will be probably 12, maybe 18 bike riders. And you're traveling on a set itinerary each day with that group. And the advantages of it are that you've got a backup if you don't really want to bike or if someone in your group doesn't want to bike that much. they can ostensibly hop into the support van. The support van is there for any bike problems. And having a local guide with you, of course, is an advantage because they know a lot about their local area, and they will also hook up with local guides where guides are required perhaps to see a World Heritage site or a special museum or something. So it affords you a lot of tour opportunities within the bike route as well.
Good. And then what is a self-guided tour?
And self-guided is what we've chosen because oftentimes we don't work well in groups, but self-guided is fantastic for us because we start and stop at our own pace. We still know what our next destination is going to be the following night. Our hotel is booked, and we are given very detailed directions, route maps, and GPS. So you know exactly the route you're taking. They've ridden it. The GPS will literally tell you how many meters your next turn is, and it's really an efficient way to bike around an area you don't know at all, and you won't get lost. You're not going to get very lost. And for us, it's a really good option because we carry camera gear. We like to stop and do photography. Are inclined to detour. We want to stop at random when we see something that piques our interest. For us, it's an abandoned church or animals in a field or something like that we want to just hang out and observe. So that's why we chose self-guided.
I like self-guided too because you can often add in an extra day here or there because with a group, you've got to do everything the same with the group. But self-guided, if there's a particular town or a village you'd like to stay in, you can make arrangements ahead of time to do that.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point. It's almost a third option. When you go towards self-guided, you can also think of it as a custom trip. One of the things about this trip that we'll talk about in Puglia, Italy, is that we loved every town we visited, and we could have spent more time in each town. As it turned out, we stayed longer at the end, but we could have just as easily booked a rest day between each bike day and then had time to really explore the sites in each of the cities. So it's really customizable entirely.
Yeah, it's very much like the West Highland Way hike that I did. And I was able to take an extra day in Rewardenen, which was so spectacular. I was like, hey, I want an extra cool day just to hang out and just enjoy this peaceful village.
Did you decide that in progress?
Yeah, you had to decide it in advance because they book all your accommodations ahead of time.
Yeah, and so that's the other great thing about bike tours is either way, guided or self-guided, your hotels will be booked. You can moderate the expenses on your trip by what level of hotel you want in a lot of cases, and your luggage is carried forward for you. So day starts with you leaving your luggage at the front desk, have some breakfast, hop on your bike, and when you arrive at your next destination, your luggage will be in your room.
Yep, that's exactly the way they worked it with my hike too.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Now, let's say you're traveling with your partner and your partner is not of the same fitness level of you. Is there an option with the bikes?
Yeah, and this actually was another thing I meant to mention up that front in the first considerations is what kind of bike you want. Our first bike trip was fairly easy, and we had regular bikes, and we were very happy with that and proud of ourselves, I must say, for completing it. And this time we were going to use regular bikes, but it was early in the spring, and we felt like we hadn't been on a bike over the winter, and I have a few knee issues with a meniscus tear. I just wasn't confident, so we reserved e-bikes. And I'm so glad we did. And I just talked to a friend of mine, actually a friend of my daughter's, who said that he arranged a family trip for his 70-year-old mother, and it was in the Dolomites. So some serious hills, if not mountains. And she used an e-bike, and the boys used regular bikes, and it was fantastic. And there are couples who have differing levels of experience on bikes too. I just highly recommend the e-bikes for anyone who's not entirely confident about keeping up.
Define e-bike, because a lot of people may never have heard that term before.
Yeah. So they are electric bikes. They have a battery that is charged each night, and they're really it's best to think of them as electric assist. It is not at all a motorized scooter effect. You cannot just sit there and putter along with your power on. It requires pedaling. So I think that's great because it takes the guilt away of using some assistance. But so the battery can be, I mean, the assistance can be turned off entirely. You don't need to use it at all. And most of the assist bikes, the e-bikes, have maybe 3 levels of assist, so that if you are, depending upon the conditions, you can just kick it into higher gear, higher assist, and it'll make it easier to cover the distance with the exertion that you are putting out. You're still putting forth some exertion, and that's, should be clear. You're not on a motorbike, you're not on a scooter. So what we found that, it's obviously, if you're on a serious hill, you're into a big wind, you're going to want to use some assistance if you're me. The other cases where I found that I used it and loved it were in cities or just getting started on a hill. You know, that effect when you first get on a bike and maybe you've left it in too high a gear and you start to pedal and it's like, oh my goodness, what have I done here? I got to really work. And you may swerve out a little bit to get yourself going, and you can't do that in a narrow lane and with traffic. And so we were advised from the get-go, put the power on right before you get on the bike, just to get that first step or two on your bike to get going, and then decide if you need it or not. And that really helped. I used it, there are a couple of short stints where we were on a highway or county road, pretty quick traffic, and I didn't want to linger there, and I was on a hill, and so I kicked it into higher gear to get through that section. I used it on tiny narrow lanes in villages where there's not room for a car to pass a bike, so the cars behind me are waiting for me to get to that end of that section. So, why linger?
Right. It helps you keep up with the traffic then.
Exactly.
Right. So about how many miles a day are you doing? Is this like hardcore all day, or is it partial day? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's partial day for most people. For us, we extended it into pretty much of a full day. We were doing about 35 miles a day, I think.
Translate that to roughly about how much pedal time per day?
For us, with stops, it was 4 to 6 hours.
Okay, so you're probably pedaling around 3?
Yeah, 3 or 4, I guess.
3 to 4, depending on your pace. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what I would recommend for cyclists is to probably get an earlier start than we did. And because, well, at any rate, I mean, we were starting about 10 o'clock, which is late. And therefore, we would arrive in the next town after the lunch hour. And that wasn't ideal. But we would have stopped. We usually like to pack an apple or a snack bar. We might stop for coffee. I think we only stopped for a more regular lunch sort of stop once or twice where we actually ate a meal. So we eat pretty lightly while we're biking. That meant that we were hungry when we arrived at the next town. But if you get up and go, then you'll get to the town by lunch. We just didn't keep to any timetable. That's kind of why we were self-guided, and it worked out fine.
Right. Or you could just take a couple hours midway of the bike ride, take lunch, and then finish up in the afternoon as well.
Exactly.
Because you're going through more than one village.
Oh, yes. Yeah. There are usually villages every hour or so.
Yeah. So, and the only thing you have to do is just get to the next destination by the end of the day sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. And preferably before dark. Although we did take lights with us, but we weren't going to. Yeah, we were well before dark.
Now, you said you'd gone on a milder trip before. Were you at all anxious about going on this a little bit more rigorous trip?
No, we weren't. We were really excited about it because since the first ride, we've been convinced that this is just an ideal way for us to travel. We love to incorporate it into any and every destination if we can, to do a bicycle stint. So we didn't have reservations about that. I did have reservations about my knee, and oddly enough, biking is fine. I just don't have any pain biking. So for those out there who may have meniscus tears, injuries, get on a bike and see if it works for you without pain. And it's a great alternative to walking, which for me is more painful. So that was my only reservation. We didn't know much about the terrain, and it wasn't extremely hilly, but that is because we didn't know is another reason that we got e-bikes.
And on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate this difficulty-wise, this particular adventure?
Probably a 2 or 3. That's such an objective thing. I don't know, depending upon my expectations, or I don't really know how to. I think the bike company probably, I think they have it at a scale of 3. I'd say it's a 2.5. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And with the e-bike, that probably makes it a little bit easier too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, and another thing too I like about the bike tours, not that I've taken one, but the more I talk to people that have, I think it's something I need to add because I'm such a hiker. I always want to hike, but you get to see so much more when you travel, when you bike, because you can go 2 or 3 times faster.
Yeah, you cover so much ground, and you still have the opportunity to stop and see things closely like you do hiking, but you can mix it up more. That can be, your hiking, I'm sure, is mostly out in the country. And this way you're kind of mixing up some city, village, agricultural areas, and this one didn't have a lot of wilderness, but you can be biking through wilderness too.
Like hiking, when you do a bike tour, you have much more interaction with the locals because you're not sitting on a bus tour, just getting out, looking at the tourist things. You're actually in the villages and asking for directions, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there is such a natural inclination for local people to welcome hikers and bikers. They feel already akin to you, knowing that you've invested some effort in having your feet on the ground, as it were. A friend of mine, that someone was talking about the difference between, flying to a destination, of course, you're just getting this cool bird's eye view, and on a train, you're seeing the world go by, and that's a lovely experience. But biking or hiking, it's like you're inside the movie, whereas in the train, you're seeing the movie. And it's a really good description because you are involved with people. You can jump into a store. You can, even in the wilderness, if you're in a car driving through a scenic route, you go over a bridge and there's no way you can even see the river below you.
Right. I love that explanation because you are part of the experience. You're part of the other people's experience as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, you are in the movie. I love that. Tell us a little bit about the adventure that you actually took. Tell us some of your highlights and what were some of your favorite things that you saw.
Well, yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, one of the things to consider when you're choosing your route is not just the difficulty level, but what else is the route going to bring to the party. And for us, the reason we chose Puglia is for World Heritage sites, and food, I think, is maybe it was a secondary consideration, but in hindsight was way up there in our appreciation of this experience. So Puglia is the stiletto heel of Italy's boot. That is the region. It's called Puglia in Italian, and to clarify, in English, it's technically Apulia, starting with the letter A. I'll just refer to it as Puglia. But this bike trip took us down and across and up again that spike heel of the boot. We started in Matera, and that is a World Heritage Site. Matera, I should mention, is just west over the border into the next region, which is called Basilicata. So not to be confused, Matera is not in Puglia, but that's where we started, and that is a thrill to visit because that is the World Heritage Site of the Sassi Caves. Sassi Caves were dwellings of the community for hundreds and hundreds of years. And up into the 20th century, into the 50s, these were still occupied and there were no modern amenities, and people lived with their animals and lived off the land, and it became sort of well known because finally it was kind of discovered that these were very squalid conditions, and there were a lot of health issues, of course. So it was people were moved out of the caves and it was cleaned up. The caves are now kind of back in business, if you will. I'm making it sound like a tourist trap, and it's not, but the caves are now used more for museum purposes. There are churches in caves, and there are restaurants in caves, and there are dwellings in caves, and you can visit a lot of them. So it's just it's also an incredible hiking area. We didn't cover all of the ground of the region that we might wanted to have seen because we didn't add a day of hiking in there, but I would recommend it for hiking too.
Okay, so we should probably try to add a day into it.
Yeah.
At least.
Well, yes. And we did add a day, and it was kind of rainy and we didn't see enough. So we ended up, after our bike trip, going back to Matera by a rental car, so that we could spend a couple more days. It's really that fascinating. Yeah, it's wonderful.
So from Matera, then where do you go?
So from Matera, we went east, and our next overnight was at another World Heritage Site, which is the town of Alberobello. And Alberobello is filled with what are called trulli homes. The trulli, or a trullo, is a stone structure with a conical shaped roof that is also stone. So they're very thick-walled, cool inside. It can get extremely hot in this part of Italy, as you can imagine. And these types of structures were used and still are used for not just homes, but for agriculture, for food storage and animals and everything. So it was kind of a thrill to us to be outside of Alberobello on our bikes and realize, oh my gosh, here's a really, really hundreds of year old trulli that's still being used out in the field. And oh my gosh, here's a brand new trulli structure that has been made into a modern home.
Right. And didn't you get to stay in one?
Yeah, we did. And that was very, very cool. It was a beautiful structure with really 3 rooms, a great room with kitchen and a bedroom, and maybe it was 2 rooms. I guess there was a bathroom too. 3 rooms.
Very cool. So on the inside too, it's all stone as well?
Yes. Yep. Very, very cool in temperature, protective feeling, and and then to see in the town of Alberobello, there are 2 hills on either side of the valley that are just spread with these homes, one next to the other. It's beautiful.
Be sure to send us a photo of that we'll put on the website at activetraveladventure.com.
I will.
And can you make sure that you please send us some photos of that? And I'll put that at activetraveladventures.com/Puglia, and Puglia is spelled Puglia. That'll be great. Thanks.
Excellent. I will do that.
So, and then from the Trullias, then where do you go?
So then, continuing east from Alberobello, we went to the town of Ostuni, which was a thrill to approach. This is known as the White City. It was it's on the eastern coast of the peninsula and is up on top of a hill. So we came over one hill and then seeing this White City across the way, and way beyond that, the ocean is quite a thrill. Ostuni, we ended up visiting again later as well. Wonderful food. It's just a great seaside Italian city.
Would that be another town that you recommend taking another rest day just to explore?
Oh, yeah, I would. Yeah, absolutely. It's got a lot going for it. It's also really cool because it's surrounded by olive orchards, and it's really beautiful. It was a major port. It's now some distance away from the sea these hundreds of years later, but
cool. And then what's next?
So from Ostuni, we went to Avetrana, And that is smack dab in the middle of these vast olive groves, orchards that go on as far as the eye can see. And biking through that was one of my favorite segments. It was just really relaxing, and through the back fields of huge olive growers. We were told that we were going to stay on a farm, which I thought might mean that we would be with a family or in an outbuilding of a farm. It turns out that this was on a property called a Masseria. The Masseria Bosco is the one we stayed in. Huge, wonderful, former, well, it's still an active agricultural area, but many of these growers of olives and wine, one or the other or both, have turned their property into kind of a bed and breakfast kind of place or outstanding restaurant and small hotel place. This one was phenomenal. It had, I don't know how many rooms, probably not more than a dozen or a dozen and a half rooms, but excellent restaurant. They make all of their own olive oil. They do olive oil tastings. They have a pool and a huge patio area and pergola outside. It would be great for a wedding or celebration of that sort. It was just amazing. And we stayed in one of the old buildings that had been decorated with antiques. We could look out over the olive trees that just went on as far as we could see in every direction. It was just beautiful. That was a great night for just watching the night sky as well, I must say. That was really wonderful.
How cool. Very nice. Very nice. And so for, am I saying this right? Avatrana, where do you go from there?
Avatrana. And then from Avatrana, we went down to Gallipoli, and I did not know that there was a Gallipoli in Italy. I knew of the Gallipoli in Turkey. So that's down on the kind of on the inside, on the west side of this spike heel of Italy, the Salento Peninsula, is the Ionic Sea. So it was right after Avatrana coming to the coast. I can send a picture of this overlook. It was quite a thrill because we had been inland up till this point. So we biked along the coast, a wonderful day of biking, and Gallipoli is a kind of a funky little forgotten town now. We stayed and enjoyed walking around.
Very cool.
And from Gallipoli, then we headed east, cutting straight east across the heel. And we stayed in a town called Otranto, which is back up north a little bit once we crossed. And then you're on the Adriatic side. So that was kind of a cool thing for me because I'm a map freak to be one bike day away from seeing two different seas. And Otranto is historic town. All of these are historic towns, and you can find beautiful churches, and the center cities are generally in really good shape and small streets. But Otranto is outstanding in that it was at one time the world's biggest port for shipping olive oil all over the world. And when you bike around here, you are not surprised at that because it's olives all as far as you can see.
Wow. And what time were you there? Were you there? Could you see the olives on the trees?
Not. They were pretty green. We were there in May.
Okay. And is that a good time of year to go?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not too hot. I think we had one sprinkle. I mean, it was really mild, and the locals were saying it was a little cooler and cloudier than usual, but we loved it. It was perfect.
Great. And then from Otranto, then what's next?
So from Otranto, we bicycled north up the Adriatic coast. Beautiful ride, and then ended our bike tour in the town of Lecce, Lecce. So my pronunciation may not be perfect there. Lecce is a college town, for one thing, and it's one of the bigger towns in the area. So it's very, very vibrant. It's got of the towns we visited, the best night scene. Just walking around after 8 or 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock is when things start to happen. And yeah, it's a beautiful city.
So let's also talk about the food.
Yeah, I really didn't expect so much good food. There are a couple of big highlights, starting with Matera. And of course, here I'm worried about my lack of training right at the beginning of the bike tour. And we get there and I'm just eating pasta like there's no tomorrow. Matera is interesting in that it has what they call a black wheat, a black pasta. And that is from the old days when they would burn the wheat fields to try to facilitate a second producing cycle in the year. They don't burn the fields anymore, but they toast the wheat in such a way that it is slightly blackened. So they have what they call a black pasta. I have a picture of a black pasta with ricotta and crisp sun-dried tomatoes. It was it was just that tangy sun-dried tomato with a rich ricotta sauce over this black pasta, which you can't taste a burn taste, but all over town you smell a toasty aroma. So they're very famous for their breads and their wheat there. So that was a great introduction. At the other end of the spectrum in Ostuni, where we spent some time after our bike ride too, is they are very famous for the orecchietta, which is the little ear-shaped pasta. And that is traditionally served very simply with kind of a pesto that might be out of broccoli or what they call rapa.
Rabe?
I thought it was spelled R-A-P-A, but I wonder if it's
Rabe, R-A-B-E? Oh, maybe it's rape? All right. Yeah, because I know there's something in the broccoli family that sounds like that.
Oh, that must be the same thing. Yeah, because I get a lot of different translations for it. And I think they kind of loosely change the greens depending upon the season and what they have too. But we literally were walking around. We didn't find the restaurant that we were looking for. We're just kind of keeping our eyes open for a place to eat and ended up at this kind of hole in the wall wine bar that had some of their a flowered butcher block stand outside their door with samples of the pasta that they were just making right then. It's that fresh. So they are literally same day pasta, making it right there in front of you and then preparing it with this delicate pesto and topped with a little basil and parmesan. It's wonderful.
Oh, good. And all that exercise, you don't feel guilty indulging.
No, exactly. That's my point. Yeah, it feels so good. I mean, that's the great thing about this. For those who are sort of trepidatious about biking, it's more akin to just going to an exercise class and then having a nice lunch. That's kind of the way the whole holiday feels. One other food stuff that I would like to mention is the appetizers. The antipasto plates in this region are pretty spectacular, and I highly recommend ordering whatever the house offers and whether or not you know what it is. And it could, in some cases, include tripe. So if you're not into that, you don't eat it, but it will also be sausages and ham and cheeses. They're very famous for their mozzarella and fresh vegetables here. So you'll get zucchini and peppers and pickled apples, olives, beans, a lot of great beans prepared nicely. So the antipasta plate is great. So
Wonderful. And I imagine between the two seas, there's lots of fish.
yes, although I was surprised we didn't eat more fish than we did, and I don't know why that is. It didn't seem to be featured on a lot of the restaurants' menus. Maybe they consider it more of an everyday dish, or maybe we were just all more in tune to the land and the vegetables. Seemed to be the case. We didn't eat a lot of meat either. We seemed to eat a lot of pasta and vegetables and beans.
And you said the accommodations were great.
Yes, they were.
And it sounds like you had a variety too. So it wasn't just your regular old guest house or so.
Right. And it was big and small hotels, historic places, new places. And one of the things that I loved about the self-guided tours is that we had from the local tour operator recommendations in each town that are all written up and ready for you. So where you might have to get your bearings from your hotel and get a couple of their standard recommendations, we already knew from the write-up that was handed to us some places to look out for and sights to see. So we could kind of plan our limited time in the cities that way. And one day in Alberobello, where the Truly homes are, we stayed a little longer the next morning because there were some other things we wanted to see. We didn't start biking until noon. That was fine, no problem. But having the restaurant recommendations by the local bike operator is really a nice deal.
Yeah, no, that's nice. It saves you a ton of time. No, very nice. And then when you look back, tell me your favorite stories?
I think, well, I'll give you a funny one and a couple of just overall impressions. One of my navigation errors. I think it's always good to have a navigator. We had one GPS, so I'm the navigator. Tom has, so I have the maps and I have the GPS. Tom had his iPhone on. He wasn't looking at a map, but he runs Strava app, which hikers and bikers use, mostly cyclists maybe, but Strava is a wonderful app that will give you your GPS where you actually went. So I have the map of where we were supposed to go. Tom's got the map of where we actually went. And it also means that you can save that route map and share it with your friends. So we were able to share our route with our Travel Past 50 readers every day.
Very cool. I'll put a link to that in the show notes and on the website as well.
So I'm the navigator, and it took me a little bit to figure out not to anticipate the directions. I mean, it does take a while to know how the GPS works. I missed a turn and took us down a 10% grade, which is pretty darn steep. And then at the bottom went, oh no, my GPS is dinging at me that I took a wrong turn. I thought Tom was going to kill me. It's like, of all the places, I go down this massive hill and realize, oh no, we got to go back up. Thank goodness again we had the e-bikes, but so I didn't want to go back up this hill until I was really, really sure, because it takes, sometimes the GPS will blink out and it takes a minute to show you that you're back on the right trail. And so I wanted to wait and walk around. And finally I got my iPhone out and used my compass on my iPhone and tried to figure it out that way. And we, educated guess, we did go back up the hill and found that was the right route. I wasn't sure until we got back up the hill if I was really leading us in the right direction. So that was my one navigation glitch. That was not my best overall impression, but it was my moment of shame, I guess.
Well, working up that hill gives you freedom to eat whatever you want, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to work. You got to work to say that you've done it. I think that seeing Matera was really quite a thrill, and walking around there, and also just the surprise of ending up at the Masseria in Avetrana was I was just so surprised at what that whole evening was going to be like, thinking that I was going to be in someone's house and then ending up on this, it's like plantation operation, where we were greeted as we were in every place, but this even more so, greeted by the proprietors. Put your bikes here. Let's get you a cold beverage, rest, and then we'll show you your room. It's just so relaxed, and it's such a wonderful experience. Any foodie, anyone with a special occasion, anyone driving around this part of Italy should, I think, make a point of going to a masseria for a meal and overnight, preferably overnight as well, so you can enjoy the wine. But the best chefs in the region tend towards these masserias. This is where you will find the best restaurants. And so they're going to be out in the middle of nowhere. They're not going to be in towns. And I do have in one of these stories the links to all the places we stayed. So I'll be sure you have that.
Anything else about the food?
The other great discovery in this region is a wine called Primitivo, and it's generally a red wine. It's wonderful. It kind of reminds me a bit of a Spanish wine, although not so oaky. It's a full red wine that is great with pasta or meats or vegetables. It's really good.
When somebody asks you about your trip, what's the first image that comes to your mind?
I think riding up to the coast before Gallipoli we had such a pleasant day going through the olive orchards, and then that just opens up to this bluff over the water. Was just a aha moment after a very pleasant day of biking. And it was all downhill from there.
And that's always nice too. Very nice. And be sure to send us a photo of that as well, put on the website.
Will do.
Anything you wish you had known before you'd gone, or any advice you'd like to give us?
I think the main thing is, as always, allow as much time as you can. I think the only thing that we would have done differently is stayed longer, maybe during our ride. But I don't even regret the way we did that at all, because we did have time at the end. We worked with a company called Wonderful Italy that is sort of like a glorified Airbnb. We loved that, and we stayed additional days in Ostuni and in a town called Martina Franca, which is really the cradle of all of this wine, olive oil, agriculture area. It's kind of right smack dab in the middle of the heel.
And one thing we can think of too is you only went about 200 miles. So even though that's a long way on bike, if you get on a train or public transport, let's say you saw a town that you liked, at the end of your journey, just allow some extra days to go back and do what you did. So you don't have to plan in advance. Oh, I'm going to stay in Monterey?
Matera, yeah.
Or Ostuni or whatnot. You could plan a few days. Yeah. Plan a few days and go back to the towns that caught your fancy.
Right, and with 3 nights stay through Wonderful Italy in Ostuni and Martina Franca, they helped us rent a car, and we drove back to Matera and stayed at Martina Franca. So we did the drive across the heel and back easily, and we also drove up the coast to visit another World Heritage site, and happened on a great seaside village there, which people can find in our post. That was just a sort of that classic cliffside Italy village that we stumbled upon in our rental car.
The whole trip sounds amazing, and you've traveled all over the world. Where does this particular adventure fall in the spectrum of your adventures?
It's really, really high up there, partly because Italy, after Spain, is the country we're most familiar with and have visited a large share of. But we had never been to this part of Italy, and it's very distinct. And that's what puts it way up there in the scale of memorable trips for us. It was a real discovery, and it cannot be lumped into the rest of Italy.
Who's visiting there? Do you see a lot of Americans or Europeans, or who are the tourists there?
Well, some of the snowbirds, the year-round visitors, are Northern Europeans who may have a house there for their winters to get away. And so that is, probably Scandinavians, Germans, some Dutch. As far as the visitors go, it's, I think, primarily because of the World Heritage sites, it's becoming a little better known among North American travelers. But we didn't really run into other Americans that I can think of along the way.
Sounds like a cool trip. So we've talked a little bit about the fact that you're so well traveled. Tell us a little bit more about Travel Past 50.
Travel Past 50 started by accident, but it was predictable for other people, I'm sure. Tom and I come from a publishing background. We published the Alternative News Weekly here in Minneapolis and St. Paul for many years. We founded it and published that, and another magazine after that. So reporting, writing, photography, even though we didn't practice that as business owners and as publishers, we migrated to easily when we started traveling. And our travels started in Ecuador. We spent between Ecuador and Chile, our first year of travels were in South America. And at the time, Tom and I were doing our separate things, doodling at blogging, I guess. And then the following year, when we decided to hike the Camino de Santiago, is when following that, we decided we should really coordinate our efforts here. And we were getting so many questions from friends that we decided to document what we were doing a little better. So now what we like to do is share our firsthand experiences first and foremost, offer some practical information. In fact, Tom's got some really good information about good backpacks and packing for a bike trip on our site that people might be interested in. So we are combining some practical information with just a lot of our firsthand experience and trying to all along the way, I think, encourage people to travel and be active and to keep their eyes open, because we feel it's just it's so eye-opening and it's so refreshing and so hopeful to get to know people around the world and realize what's in common rather than what's dividing us.
Definitely. And as much as I agree on the travel part, I would like to know your opinions too. What makes adventure travel in particular special? Because you seem to be getting more and more adventurous.
Yeah, and the older we get, the more adventurous we get, which is really interesting, I think. It is a combination of the fact that it feels good for us. It's like as long as we can hike and bike, it not doing that would make us age a lot more quickly, I think, if you want to put it that way. It keeps us young, it keeps us inquisitive, but the main part of traveling is being inquisitive and trying things. And whether that's the physical activity that's opening you up to those new vistas and people or not, the point is seeing things that you might not otherwise see, or even approaching things that might be part of your everyday life. I biked yesterday in the city here, but does the experiences of traveling and biking at home can each instruct the other. What do you stop for? What do you look at? Who do you talk to? How do you manage a situation that's unfamiliar or a breakdown, or how do you share a happy moment when you're alone? Those are all part of the travel experience.
Definitely. Any final thoughts?
I just encourage people to give it a whirl. If try a bike tour. I hope you do.
I vow right now that I will do a bike tour somewhere next year. I promise. So I mark this down.
All right. And I also encourage people, if you don't know whether to reserve an electric bike or a regular bike, go to your local bike shop and try one out. Just hop on and see what you think.
Yeah, I did the electric bike on a wine vineyard tour, or that little town of Cassis. Also, I'll put a link to that. That was my favorite town in France. That it was a blast because it's fun. I mean, when we got to a hill, it's like bzzz, up the hill you go. So, and you could use your muscle or you could use the bike. It was really nice.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a blast. I'm going to have to put this one on my list too. Every time I talk to you, I got to add something else to my list.
Well, I hope too that if your listeners have other questions, they can certainly respond to us through the website or Facebook or personally through email, and we would be happy to answer more specific questions. I hope we've covered the basics.
Sounds great. Now I'll put links to all your social tags, website, and any of the links that we talked about today will be in the show notes and on the webpage at activetraveladventures.com/Puglia, Puglia. And thanks so much for your time, Kristen.
Thank you, Kit. It's a pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed today's adventure doing a bicycle tour through the Stiletto Heel of Italy. I think bike touring in general is kind of a cool way of travel, and I've actually just booked my first trip. I'm going to be going to Ireland next late spring and doing a bicycle tour through the beautiful Irish countryside. So I'm excited about that. Kristen really got me motivated to do that, and I promised when we had our interview earlier this month that I would go ahead and commit to 2019. I'm going on a bike tour myself. So I'm excited about that. Spreading my wings a little bit away from the hiking that I tend to favor. So of course I'll be doing an episode of that next summer. If you have not already submitted your stories for the upcoming book on adventure travel, please email at kit@activetraveladventures.com or send me a voicemail at 252-515-0166. I'd love to hear your stories, positive, negative. Let's make this a participatory book where we're all involved in putting out our great stories and encouraging others to get out and adventure travel. So come on, I know you've got some great stories. Please share them. And speaking of sharing, could you please help spread the word about this podcast? Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it on Instagram stories, share it with your friends. The way people find out about podcasts is basically through sharing and word of mouth. So please take a minute or two and share it with your friends. I sure would appreciate it. You know how over and over again we hear some of our guests saying, Nepal, 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 how they love Nepal. They have to go back to Nepal. But most people go to the main area of the Everest Base Camp area. This time, when I come back in 2 weeks, we're going to go to a lesser-known region that is just as spectacular, but not as crowded. So I think you're really going to enjoy going to Annapurna with me. I'll be back in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from Thursday. And until then, this is Kit Parks, and adventure on.